He was selected by new Twitter CEO Elon Musk as one of the reporters to unravel the tangled web of collusion between the big tech giant and big government collaborators. Together, these entities work behind the scenes to censor conservative points of view and reinforce the dogma of democratic policies. It's not my opinion. That is now the fact. Here with us now is the very reporter that did all that, and this is not an easy job, Matt Taibbi. He's one of the few independent investigative journalists left in this country, the founder and editor and chief of the newly minted Substack Racket. Matt, last week we were going to do this, but you were called to go out and get another Twitter file release. What did you find?
So in the early Trump years, there was an organization called Hamilton 68 that was the source of probably hundreds of news stories over the course of a period of years that was allegedly tracking Russian bots. Their secret sauce was a list of 600 accounts they said were linked to Russian influence. Well, in the Twitter files, we found the list. And the list, let's just say, is mostly bereft of Russians, but is full of real Americans. And what they basically did is a fraud. They took ordinary conversations of ordinary conservatives mostly and essentially just called it Russian influenced.
The Hamilton 68 is a fraud. Hamilton 68 out to stop Russian influence was actually out there to stop conservatives, stop pro-Trump trending, stop pro-Trump popularity, whether it was Charlie Kirk on down, which you had reported earlier. But this 68 had an interesting way of doing things. They would take a trend, credit it to a Russian bot, and diminish its quality. But it wasn't just Twitter users. Then other entities, New York Times, Mother Jones, would go and build off this. So next thing you know, this would be pervasive all over mainstream media. Can you unwind that?
Yeah, so the key here is that they built this tool called the Hamilton 68 dashboard that purported to track Russian bots. Again, it was based on 644 accounts, which we now know are mostly organic accounts, mostly real people, mostly in the West. But they would say these accounts are now following, let's just say, the hashtag Fire McMaster, or hashtag Release the Memo, or hashtag I Stand with Laura, or hashtag Parkland Shooting. And then you would see a flood of news stories come out in the next day, maybe in the New York Times, maybe the Washington Post, maybe CNN, maybe MSNBC, that would say Russian bots are supporting this hashtag. In reality, there were no Russians, or there were very few Russians, let's put it that way. Most of these were actual real Americans who were just doing ordinary conversations on Twitter.
So Mike Morell, let's look at those four again. Mike McFaul, an ambassador to Russia, certainly has credibility. Mike Morell used to brief Bush as well as Barack Obama, CIA guy. And then a Podesta, as left-wing as it gets, was supposed to be the chief of staff of Hillary Clinton, ran her campaign. And Clint Watts, an MSNBC contributor. So he could continue this false reporting as so-called experts in Russian bots on another news network. What is your reaction to this reality that this was taking place? And for those at home who wonder what kind of impact it had, what do you think?
I think these stories about Russian bots influencing this or that politician had an enormous cultural and political impact over a course of years in America. And although conservatives were definitely targeted, and in fact, Twitter employees talked about that, how this was a site that would take ordinary conversations between conservatives and accuse them of being Russians. You can see that in my thread. But it also affected Democrats like Tulsi Gabbard and Bernie Sanders. So this was a site that basically went after people, anybody who was a critic of the Democratic Party, be it on the left or right. And we see that in the composition of the list, which also includes people like the editor of Consortium, which is a progressive magazine.
Pretty amazing. Just some people who came back at you because you wrote this. You are not a left-wing, you are not a right-wing conservative commentator, are you?
No, of course not. No, I actually wrote a book called Insane Clown President about Donald Trump. Right. Look, for me, I'm a traditional sort of ACLU liberal. Like, I grew up in the news media, and what offends me about this story is that it's just not true. Like, I don't really care about the politics of it, but all it would have taken was one reporter throughout all this time to say, you know what, who's on that list? Or I'm not going to do the story unless you tell me who's on that list. And none of this would have happened. What the story is really about is a breakdown in the standards of mainstream media, and I think that's what's really important here.
The FBI played a role in this. Then you have other groups. Politicians would understand this wouldn't be true, and they go out and said it anyway publicly. So this is what some of the people are saying about you, Matt. The FBI issued a statement calling you and your fellow journalist Bari Weiss, Michael Schellenberger, conspiracy theorists. CNN anchors took shots at you, suggesting that because you were independent and unaffiliated with major and credible news organizations, that the reporting was unreliable, which is a joke. One Slate headliner called the Twitter Files finale the Great Internet Grievance Wars. How do you feel about that description of what you were asked to do?
I mean, look, some of it is professional jealousy. Some of it is just absurd. The idea that the Washington Post is going to call me a conservative journalist is ridiculous. I worked in the mainstream media for a long time. I was at Rolling Stone for 15 years. I'm the winner of the National Magazine Award. I've had 4 New York Times bestsellers. I'm about as credentialed as a reporter can be in this business. The idea that this is some sort of off-the-wall conspiracy theory journalism is ridiculous, and they know it. It's just a way of non-responding to the content of these stories.
Look, I could spit to you for another hour talking about the Hunter laptop and so many other things, but you've covered that to a degree. Matt, lastly, this started maybe in the right way. Europe was saying ISIS is infiltrated. They know they're looking to attack in Europe. The intelligence agencies wanted access to some of these social media platforms, but it morphed into a political push for political gain. Is that correct? Is that a correct conclusion?
Yeah, and in fact, Twitter executives had read a paper about what had happened in Europe. They were obviously privy to what happened as well. But after bombings in Brussels and Paris, the EU pressured all of the internet platforms to basically let them get involved in the content moderation process. And that exact same thing basically happened in the United States. The difference being that they really had to manufacture the Russian threat a lot more than they did the ISIS threat in Europe. And they did it through things like the Hamilton 68 project.
Poisoning the U.S.-Russian relations for political gain. And that has titanic implications, maybe what we're experiencing right now. Because, believe it or not, the Russians didn't do it. These 5 did in this case. More to come. Matt, it's been very educational. Be able to talk to you.